A really grim week in America. We're going to talk about that and make what sense of it we can. We're going to talk about a major projects office in Canada that is an office, but doesn't seem to be that major. We're going to talk about crime, justice, and public safety in this country. It's the Line Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Universities Canada. Canada has promised millions of new homes, shorter waits in health, and stronger defense. But promises don't design and engineer roads, staff clinics, or secure networks. People do. That's why we need a clear, coordinated system to attract and retain the world's best talent while creating more opportunities for Canadians. The best and brightest should always see Canadian universities as their first choice. It's time to put talent at the center of Canada's priorities. The path forward starts with training people, and Canada's world-class universities are ready to lead the way. To learn more, visit Univcan.ca. Well, as video viewers will have noted immediately, Jen Gerson has changed a lot since last week. Rob Breakenridge filling in for Jen Gerson. Jen's been traveling this week. She's covering a story out of town, and she's actually on a plane back home to Calgary today while we're recording this, but she wasn't going to make it in time to do the podcast. So we've swapped in our next available Calgarian, Rob Breakenridge, a host of the Line Alberta podcast and a longtime broadcaster and friend of mine as well. So great to have Rob here on the pod. And Rob, what a shitty week. We're recording this on the morning, a couple hours earlier than normal. It's Friday, September the 12th, 2025. And this was a week that was going to be busy no matter what. I had identified this week ahead of time as going to be busy. And then I was pushing a grocery cart down the aisle of a local grocery store. And my phone starts going nuts. And kind of in that way, I'm sure you know, when it's not like a text, it's like 50 of them all at once. And I've had that experience before. I'm sure you have too. And I looked at my phone and it was Charlie Kirk, the American right-wing influencer and speaker, had been shot on stage in Utah where he'd been giving an event. Yeah. Rob, I'll tell you, the moment I saw the injury, I knew. I've seen enough of these things. I knew where that was going to end. And when it was announced, I felt terrible. I felt terrible for the wife and the children of this guy, but I mainly felt terrible for America. I'm really worried that this is just going to be another one of these. And something I've been so frustrated by this week, Rob, the tit for tat nature of this, but everybody always forgets the tit or the tat. So people have been telling me all week with straight faces, it's the left wing that's doing the violence. And I'm like, there has absolutely been left wing violence, 100%. But are we forgetting that two Democrat legislators were attacked in Minnesota a few months ago? And yes, people have forgotten that. I bring that up and they go, okay. Are you getting the sense, Rob, that people right now who are even 1,000 miles removed from this stuff, literally, are feeling personally under siege these days?
I think people are feeling really uneasy about all of this. I sort of had that same kind of sick feeling on Wednesday when I saw the news, and I'm like, I had some other stuff I was going to post. I just didn't feel like any of it. Who cares about any of this right now? And I didn't even feel like I really had anything of value to say. What do you say to something like this? I saw the story. So then it was, I don't know if it was late Wednesday, early yesterday. I think this was in Idaho. So someone had organized some kind of candlelight vigil. Somebody or some group of people goes by and they yell, "Fuck Charlie Kirk." And then a huge brawl breaks out. And I'm like, that just kind of encapsulates a lot of what's going on in the United States. It just feels really dark and depressing. And I don't know that we're immune from it either. I mean, hopefully we're not quite as far down that path. But yeah, it was really tough to digest it all.
I saw that. I did see the Boise, I don't know how to pronounce it, but I saw whatever it was in Idaho. And yeah, like I mentioned to you, I had weird conversations this week with people in Canada, friends, family, associates. And one of the things, Rob, again, I want to stress, when we're recording this, the police in Utah have arrested a suspect. He's been identified as 22-year-old Tyler Robinson. and we're starting to get the first little bits of biographical information coming out about this guy. I'm just going to be cautious. We're going to be cautious on this podcast because this is the third guy they've detained. And the first two guys have been released in a matter of hours. This one seems more solid, I'm going to say politely. But I just don't want to get too bogged down in details that are going to change rapidly. But I will say, we don't know why Charlie Kirk was shot. And all of us, we're not idiots. We all go, okay, guy associated with the MAGA and the right wing. We all think probably it's a political opponent who killed him. I'm gonna put that on the table. My immediate assumption was some lefty shot this guy. But I don't know that. It could be a crackpot. It could be something personal. It could be false flag. Like, I have no idea. I'm going to let the cops do their job, and I'm going to see what they come up with. Yeah. And people have been telling me all week, but what about they? They're after us. And I've been asking them, who is they?
I know.
No one has an answer. But they're convinced they're under attack, and they don't know from who.
It's weird. And I think, obviously it's good in a sense of pursuing justice that they caught somebody, but I think it's good that they caught somebody just for the simple fact that the longer that went on without a suspect in custody, the more I think paranoia gets fueled, conspiracy theories get fueled. And I think we're even still at that point, even with somebody in custody. But you're right. I think, people sort of imply from this that this is how our political opponents think of us. They're going after us. They hate us. And you see that get ramped up. I mean, all the people responding to this saying, okay, we're at war and we need to avenge Charlie Kirk. Like, holy crap. I mean, where does that all go, right? So that's kind of the razor's edge maybe that things are at right now. Do people just say things have gone too far? We need to get to a better place? I think it was in North Carolina. There was like a joint statement put out by young Republicans and young Democrats, and hey, we're all Americans, and we can disagree, and we're still friends at the end of the day. Like, that's terrific, right? I mean, if it sort of leads to that sort of sentiment, then maybe there is a silver lining. But if it just spirals out of control, then this we'll look back at this as kind of that tipping point.
I told you before we started recording that I was going to throw a curveball at you here. And I promise you it wouldn't be a scary one. But one of the things that I've just really been thinking about this week, and I've mentioned this before, Rob, I tell Jen this all the time. My wife isn't political. She doesn't follow the news closely, doesn't follow politics closely. She works with special needs kids. Like, her plate is full. She has a lot of stuff to worry about, and weird stuff that I'm writing about normally isn't part of it. But she said to me yesterday, Thursday, she goes, I almost forgot it was 9/11, and no one was talking about it. And I told her, yeah, I had the exact same instinct. I saw a couple of news stories about the ceremony at Ground Zero in New York. Every year there's a retrospective piece about some survivors. I read something in the New York Times about there's apparently a project in New York that is continuing to gather photos, including ones that have never before been released, things like that. So that's good. But one of the things, Rob, and I want to kind of just bounce this off you, like we could do the thing where we swap our 9/11 stories, and we've all got them. But one of the things that's just weird to me is that 9/11, for the years after it happened, felt like it had happened yesterday. Yeah. It doesn't feel that way anymore. 9/11 feels a long, long, long time ago, and I think it's just because I don't really recognize America. Just not the same country.
Yeah, it was weird because, even still after 20 plus years, it still felt like there was some gravity to the day, and there was a special focus on the day, and everything else kind of fell by the wayside. Even through the pandemic still, it felt like initially there was still that. But yesterday it was like an afterthought, right? Because something so pivotal had just happened. Like, I don't want to draw parallels. I mean, it would be really awkward to do so, but it was in a way like you sort of feel like, okay, in that sudden moment, something fundamental changed. Like, you think back to that day, and I think the feeling that all stuck with us was when that second plane hit. Like, in that instant, everything has changed now. And that was at such a much more massive scale, obviously, but you sort of felt to some extent, seeing those horrific images of this assassination, like right in that moment, potentially something huge has changed, or there's no going back to that moment before it, right? So that was kind of the weird, eerie, almost bit of a parallel, I suppose, between the two. But yes, this was definitely the bigger story yesterday, or at least what was on people's minds yesterday, and it was a little surreal to see that. And you're right. I think it gets further and further in the rearview mirror. You've got people who are well into adulthood who didn't live through that. It's weird.
You've got people who can legally buy a beer in the States today who were born years after 9/11.
Yeah.
And I think I had the same feeling you did, that something has changed. One of the things I made a point about, Rob, when I was still working at the National Post many, many years ago, I got to the point where I told my editor at the time I wasn't going to write about mass shootings anymore. I had run out of wisdom. Like, I had nothing left to offer. And it was depressing. And I think, I think it was Ezra Klein. Ezra Klein ended up writing an essay this week that a lot of people are pissed at him for. I haven't even read it. But what he also did was he tweeted out a list of recent acts of political violence in the United States, particularly violence against people, assaults or murders or attempted. The two attempts on Mr. Trump, obviously, being on the list.
The Pennsylvania governor too, right?
Yeah, and the Pennsylvania governor, and the attempt to abduct the Michigan governor, right. The assassination attempts on Mr. Trump, the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, the killing of the attacks on the Democratic legislators in Minnesota, and there's a. Do I ever know how to have a good time or what? Because I've been reading the data set that's kept by a professor at the University of Maryland on political violence in the United States. And there are really interesting insights to draw from that. And I remember reading this about a year ago because I wrote another column ahead of the last election. Political violence exists on both sides of the spectrum in the United States. And I'm not saying this in a both-sider way. I'm just telling you what the data is. There is a multi-decade observable pattern of political violence in the United States that is broadly classified into three categories by the researchers at the University of Maryland: right-wing domestic extremism, left-wing domestic extremism, and Islamic extremism. Those are the three categories that they've been tracking. And there are some trends that you can observe in those categories they've been tracking. One of the ones, for instance, is that left-wing political violence normally targets property. It's usually the destruction of property during riots or smashing in windows or targeted fire bombings of facilities that are identified with one cause or another. Right-wing political violence in the United States is often physical violence directed against other people. And when you look at incidents of political violence, there's a really interesting mix of right-wing, left-wing, and Islamic. When you look at homicide, it is lopsidedly right-wing. And I think if you were to try and have this conversation with Americans these days, maybe 20 or 30% would be receptive. The rest would reject half of what I just said. The right wing doesn't want to hear it. The left wing doesn't want to hear it. They're convinced this is the other guy's problem. Like we said before, they are doing it. I don't know how America comes back from that. I really don't. And I love America, and I always have, and I wish nothing but the best for it. But that's a sick country.
Well, I think you're right. Part of it is you got half the country not willing to confront half of the problem, and same goes for the other half. So how do you ever make progress? Because nobody really wants to acknowledge that we've got bad apples in our bunch. The bad apples are on that side, and so when you saw the attacks on those legislators in Minnesota, you sort of had half the country really trying to downplay it, not really wanting to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. And I think in the aftermath of what happened to Charlie Kirk, I think you see that to some extent. Although in fairness, I've seen pretty widespread condemnation of this from those on the left, or certainly the Democratic Party. I don't know if we need to talk about the handful of weirdos who are happy about this or celebrating this, but I do think part of the problem is just the unwillingness to address it. And then there's the whole other elephant in the room, and all of these shootings. just the easy access to firearms in the United States, whether it's school shootings, political shootings, gang shootings. There's that whole issue that no one really wants to touch on in the U.S. either. So it's a toxic combination, I think.
One of the things I wonder about, I was thinking about 9/11, right? Like we talked about it already. One of the things I remember, obviously, and you'll remember too, is the incredible unity in the United States and around the world. Like, I remember it was probably September 12th, 2001, and I'm walking to school, and one of my neighbors down the street, no one we knew, they were like 10 or 15 houses down, but they were on my path to walk to school, had like taken a bunch of scrap metal and lawn chairs and had somehow bent it into an improvised gigantic flagpole, and like an absolutely massive US flag was too big to even flap in the wind, but it was like draped across the guy's front lawn. And there was that moment of unity. And one of the things I've wondered since looking at the United States today, because this is something like people are going to dismiss what we're saying, Rob. It's vibes, or we're looking at the wrong Twitter accounts. It's not. Pollsters are tracking political polarization in the United States, and it's ugly.
Yeah. And
I wonder if 9/11 and the unity that came after it sort of glossed over some problems that were already festering, or maybe, as others have said, maybe the 2008 crisis plus the failure of the Iraq War broke American society. COVID probably didn't help. Like, I don't know. Yeah. But one of the things that worries me is there one person in America alive today who could actually bring the country together, actually say, hey, everybody, settle down, like a trusted voice. And what I say this a little bit tongue in cheek, but not really. I can only think of one who could even maybe do it. Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. Who the hell else can? Maybe Tom Hanks a little bit? Denzel Washington a bit, maybe? Who the hell can bring Americans together? Who can collectively tell? Because there's probably only about 30% of Americans that are actually actively looking to have a civil war. The other 70% are scared shitless. Who will everybody listen to? I can't think of anybody.
I don't know. Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking about that the other day. Like, the idea of seeing like Barack Obama and George W. Bush on a stage together. But I think in some ways they're almost tainted, right? In some way, or people would see that as an attack on Trump or an attack on the left somehow because of how political they are. But it just sort of reminds you that there kind of was a time, maybe recently in American politics, where it wasn't such like a blood sport, for lack of a better term, where you could see a Republican and a Democrat friendly, right? And not at each other's throats. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's a way out of it, because it's almost like this is the way to succeed in politics is you have to play this game. You have to tap into hatred of the other, hatred of the political opponent. And show that you mean that more than the other person that you're running against, right? So I don't know. It just feels like that's now the norm, and maybe it's Trump's fault. I don't know. I mean, he certainly has benefited from that, right? It's hard to imagine Donald Trump succeeding like this kind of a politician in a different era. So maybe it's just a byproduct of it as opposed to creating it. But it just feels like that's not going to change anytime soon.
My gut feeling on Trump, and this is something obviously American sociologists and historians can debate. I've never thought he's to blame for any of this. I've always viewed him as a symptom. Mm-hmm. The ability to, I say this tongue in cheek, but I actually mean it. Trump was able to somehow find a way to mock annoying Hollywood celebrities on social media and pivot that into becoming a two-time president. And I think back, we all think about what President Trump has been like in or out of office, because there was the 4 years in between. But we don't remember what Donald Trump was like in, say, 2014. He was a reality TV show guy who would get into Twitter feuds with the hosts of The View.
Yeah.
And he talked about things that other politicians didn't want to talk about. He talked about things in ways other politicians didn't want to talk about. And he said things that other politicians wouldn't want to say. And there was an audience for it. And I don't blame Trump for that. I blame the Republican and Democratic parties for not having enough of an immune system to resist that. One of the things that jumps out at me, though, is interesting. So again, I'm pushing my grocery cart around the store when I get word that Kirk is shot. And I was there to pick up like 5 things. It was not a big shop. And I see the video, one of the videos taken from the scene of him getting hit in the neck, and I know he's done. 99 times out of 100, you ain't surviving that wound. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God. And I start thinking, and this is grim, this is a confession. I start thinking about which particular friends of mine are going to go the most insane. And by the time I pushed my cart to the checkout aisle and, loaded my reusable bag and drove home, it's about 10 minutes away, I was already having text messages come in from people I know who had in their minds identified the suspect and the motive. Yeah. Well, obviously it's, and honestly, Rob, it's coming from both sides. I have friends of mine telling me within moments of Kirk being hit, before his death had been announced, Reichstag fire, Republicans set this up. It's a false flag. They just martyred Charlie Kirk, and now they're going to use it to justify a crackdown. I've got other friends telling me clearly it's a transvestite, some radical trans activist who hated Kirk for what he stood for. Both these people live in Toronto.
Yeah.
How are they going to function in the same society together? What are they going to agree on? I don't know, man. I got no answers to this. Maybe you do.
No. Well, and then you didn't have to look far to see immediately, right? There's that whole segment that blames the Jews immediately when something happens.
Oh yeah,
So
people out there.
There's enough toxicity out there, but this becomes a radicalizing moment too, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think, that's the concern, right? Is how is this being processed? How is this being handled by people? How are they reacting to this? If the reaction is, as it should be, sadness, horror, and reflection, then some good can come from something awful. But I think you're right. I think it sort of reinforces certain worldviews. It becomes a cause that people rally behind in kind of a dark way, as though, this is war, or this is, this needs to be avenged, or, we need to go after our enemies because they're coming after us. Like, when you sort of see that kind of rhetoric out there, that's where you worry, like, geez, where's this going? And if people in Canada are sort of feeling that way, like, I don't think there's some huge big wall that protects us from all this stuff, right? So I think I think we should worry too about where things go here.
Do you think, so you've been in the biz, what, more than 20 years, right? Like 20-year broadcasting career, columnist. Have you ever seen Canadians more consumed by American tribal battles?
No, not like this. We've always had a preoccupation with what goes on in the United States, but I think it was easier to tune out in the past. And so part of that's driven by events. Part of it's social media. Like, we both were had a lot of years in media before social media was even a thing. And so it's easy to see, like, pre and post social media, just how much it changes our discourse and the kinds of things we're thinking about and talking about, and how we view politics, how we view each other. Like, it's, that's a big factor in it. But sure, it's unprecedented, shall we say.
One of the other social media angles, your kids are a bit older than mine, so I don't know if you have to worry about this as much, but like, my kids are 11 and almost 13. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I was grocery shopping, and by the time I made it home, the kids had been home for 5 minutes. So they were in the house without me for like 5 minutes. And as I carry in my bag and I say, hey kids, I'm trying to be responsible dad. And I say, hey guys, look, something really upsetting just happened in the United States. And I know you both, you're going to be on your iPads playing games with your friends. My son plays a hockey game with his friends and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I said, I want you to stay off of news sites. If you have any questions about what's going on, ask me. I'll answer them as best I can. And then my daughter goes, oh, is this about the guy who got shot in the neck? I just saw that.
Wow.
And okay. And she's like, I don't think that guy's going to survive. I was like, no, me neither. So you talk about just the speed of social media, just how ubiquitous this stuff is. A 4 minute, maybe 5 gap in parental availability. And my daughter has already seen a live stream, high definition assassination.
Yeah.
I want to come back in a minute. Rob Breakenridge filling in for Jen Gerson. We're going to talk about a little Canadian politics next. We're going to move this more onto our normal ground here, but we knew we had to start talking about this because it's the story of the day. It's the story of the week, and I wish it wasn't, but it is. So stick around, and as always, check us out at readtheline.ca. Like and subscribe to us there. This is Matt Gurney with Rob Breakenridge filling in for Jen Gerson on the Line Podcast. For hundreds of communities across Canada, forestry is a lifeline, supporting 200,000 workers, $87 billion in annual revenues, and $37 billion in exports, $29 billion to the United States. But it's more than just a driver of our economy. It's key to addressing some of our biggest challenges. We need an action plan for our forest sector and its employees, one that will help build the homes we need with Canadian wood, reduce the risk of wildfires, and create more family-supporting jobs right here at home. To learn more about what forestry can do for Canada, visit forestryforthefuture.ca. Well, here we are again. Rob Breakenridge guest hosting this week. Jen Gerson is on her way back to Calgary, but we weren't sure the flights were going to get her home in time. So Rob graciously stepped in to do this episode with me. We need to maintain Toronto-Calgary balance, or the force goes out of alignment or something. Yeah. So you and I spent the first segment talking about what's happening in the States and some of what's happening up here. And something I'd mentioned to you, Rob, is that there's an irony this week. It was when Kirk was shot. Immediately, I thought to myself, oh, shit, there goes every other story. Sorry, 1 second. All right, I'm going to lay down that again. I immediately thought, oh, shit, there goes every other story, right? Like just everything else we were going to be talking about this week just went into the toilet. And there was a really interesting story this week that probably should have got more attention than it did. The Major Projects Office. You want to run me through this here? What was actually announced this week by the Major Projects Office, which I think is headquartered in your hometown?
Yes, right here in Calgary. Dawn Farrell, who previously was involved with the Trans Mountain Pipeline, among other things, she's kind of in charge of this office. So I think now we'll just kind of see, okay, what does that actually mean in practice? Like, what does she do? What does this office do? And we got some low-hanging fruit here with projects that are already relatively far along in various stages. So we've got, I think the big one that Albertans are kind of interested in, and the Premier was talking about it, you got phase 2 of LNG Canada. So that was already a pretty big LNG facility on the West Coast. This will kind of double its capacity. Then you've got, I guess, in Ontario there, they're going to finally have some small modular reactors. It won't just be theoretical anymore. That was one. And then I guess we got a couple of different copper mine projects, and the Port of Montreal is going to get a little bit bigger. So there's your Fantastic Five, right?
Yeah. You know, it's funny you mentioned that. Obviously, you noticed the exact same thing that I did. Oh, look, the booty is being spread around everywhere. Everybody gets a little something. Yeah. One of the things that jumped out at me, and I don't hate the idea of a Major Projects Office. Actually, you know what? I'm going to rephrase that. I like the idea of a major project office, but one of my buddies has what he calls the Kelsey rule of politics. And the Kelsey rule of politics is before government tries to fix a problem, it should first check and make sure it's not subsidizing it. And one of the things that jumps out at me, I'm adopting the Kelsey rule a bit. It's not a direct application of it, is that it seems to me that the Major Projects Office only exists not to fix problems in the economy, but to fix problems in government. Like the reason we need this thing is because the government has basically said, we're going to have 2 streams of government approvals, the existing dysfunctional one for almost everything. But for some special projects, we're going to have a good approvals process. And I don't know, call me crazy, Rob. My instinct, just as a citizen and a taxpayer, is maybe we should have one good system where we didn't need to have exceptional means to go about things. Right. I remember saying to Jen on one of these podcasts that I think one of the most interesting indicators in recent political history in this country And there's so many great examples of this. Military procurement's a great example of this. The passport fiasco is a great example of this. The Phoenix payroll system is a great example of this. And I think we can definitely add major projects office to this, is that we now live in a country where ordinary results require extraordinary processes and efforts. Where, it like nothing we're talking about there, like should the military be able to buy equipment on a reasonable time scale and budget? Yeah, I think most people would say yes. Should we have been able to get passports? And yeah, we can do some of these things, but it requires extra attention. And if the government is not giving something extra attention, everything just falls to fucking pieces. And looking at this list of major projects, one of the ones you didn't mention, but I love it, is the high-speed rail plan. They're calling it Alto, I think. This high-speed rail corridor from Toronto all the way up to Quebec City. So I was in Europe a couple of months ago. We took high-speed trains everywhere. I love high-speed trains. Sign me up. But it's why do we need a major projects office to do something that Spain, France, Italy, they just do? Like, what's wrong with us?
Well, yeah. What's funny, by the way, is just the technicalities of it all. So you have the 5 projects that were identified, and then you had these others that have kind of been referred to the office. So that includes like this Pathways carbon capture project in Alberta that could be the link to a pipeline, and I suppose we can get into that in a second. And yeah, high-speed rail was another. So there's the projects that are the 5 that are the ones that are of the national interest. These other ones are going to be looked at, and they could be at some point. And yeah, you're right. It's like, instead of cleaning up the mess, you just sort of build this thing on top of it, and let's go with that. But the problem is, like, we need in this country a real injection of investment and economic activity. And so everything that happens below the major projects, there's still all kinds of problems, right? So things aren't great in the economy as it stands right now. And potentially, depending how things play out, we could really go off a cliff here. So yeah, these things will all help. All of these projects are good. Like the 5 that were identified, great. If they're completed and functioning, then sure, that's good. But what about everything else, right? Nothing, the things that don't rise to the level of being a major project, like they all still matter. And we're not doing a good job really of moving all of everything else along. And so we got to the point, as you say, where we're kind of dependent on this weird kind of approach.
So I'm not going to tell you who this is for reasons you'll understand. Well, I'll tell you off the air. I'm not going to say it in public. A member of my family is having a health problem. Nothing life-threatening, but something painful. And this person has decided to pursue private treatment options. That's going to mean private MRIs and probably then private surgery. And the costs of this are going to be significant because obviously there's no insurance, right? This relative of mine is Canadian. We could be looking at all in 20, 25,000, maybe more, maybe up to 40,000. But it's a quality of life issue, and they've got the money, and they should do it. Mm-hmm. And I know this seems like I just brought up a complete non sequitur, but the reason I bring this up is because it seems to me like the major projects office is sort of replicating our healthcare, where we've got one system that doesn't work well, and it's really hard to navigate, and there's a lot of delays and a lot of waiting lists. And if you want to get your mine approved, well, good luck, wait 15, 20 years and we'll get back to you. It's kind of a race, right? Like what happens first? Do you get your knee replaced or do you get your resources project approved? But like in the same way that the Canadian system, either through clinics in the United States or people traveling between provinces, or we have hospitals that have opened up on Indigenous land, all finding ways to bypass the Canada Health Act. Now we have a major projects office that's basically doing the same thing. For the right people with the right connections, you're going to bypass that waiting list. And I'm not loving it, but there's something very Canadian about it. The thing that did jump out at me, though, you and I were talking about this just before we hit record here. These projects are, I think you said it really well. It's not that they're not important, but they pick the easy stuff, relatively speaking. The relatively low-hanging fruit is what you said. Stuff that's approved. Like, or stuff that's already underway. Like, do we need a major projects office to get this stuff done, or are these the things that are going to give the project office a win?
Well, yeah. And what kind of an indictment of that, of our system is that even when it comes to things that are already approved, you still need something unique and special and powerful to get it across the finish line. Like it'd be, it's one thing, and I'm sure there's going to be projects that come up that are really in the early stages or the proposal stage. And okay, yeah, the idea that in a crisis we need something that can take a concept to reality and we got to slash it in half or whatever it is. But the idea that something that's approved or that's in development and it's still such a glacial pace that you need something like this, like what does that say about how things get done in Canada, right? So it's dismaying as it is encouraging. Like it sucks that that's the reality and no one really wants to fix it. I guess it's good that for now we've got this magic kind of shortcut that'll hopefully get these things moving, because we definitely need it right now.
I know exactly what you mean. On my On the Line episode earlier in the week with Steph Levitz, I was kind of in that exact same situation where you're like, well, on the one hand, I hate the fact that we have needed to come up with this kludged together compromise solution to a long-standing issue of dysfunction. On the other hand, hey, at least we got it. Because yesterday we didn't even have that. I think what you said was really bang on, though. The idea that if you're not covered by the major projects office, you're not important, and we're just condemning you to the usual Canadian healthcare style approvals process, which is join a list and shut up and wait. And, we talk about these things in the context of mines and pipelines and energy projects and transportation infrastructure. But one of the things, like, have you had to renovate a home or build on a piece of land anytime recently, Rob? Oh my God.
Unfortunately, no.
So, 10 years ago when we moved into our house in Toronto, more than 10 years ago now, we had to get building permits, and that was just a friggin' fiasco. And then, like, friends of mine are kind of constantly shuffling through living in Toronto. Nothing gets built in this city. People are putting on additions to their house or putting pools in their backyard. They're just not telling the government, because the 2-week permitting process realistically takes 8 or 9 months. And people are just bypassing the dysfunction here. So, okay, we've got a major projects office now. We should probably just fix the government. I want to ask you another question, though. Tell me about what wasn't on the list, because that was interesting. There was one major omission that I know people out in your neck of the woods noticed. No pipelines.
Yeah. Well, and just to your point, though, and I think that's right now what the Conservatives are kind of keying on. Like, we've still got this underlying dysfunction that the government's not addressing. But I think at the same time, in being able to announce these projects and moving them along, I think that does demonstrate some level of competency, which I think is just what Canadians want right now, some basic level of competency. Like, what are you actually doing to address things right now? So maybe this helps Carney reinforce that perception that he's someone who gets things done. Here in Alberta, it was interesting because Danielle Smith has made a point of saying that, look, we need a new pipeline. We're going to need another major new export pipeline, especially we want to have other export options, right? So, and it's such a powerful symbol here as well. Just the willingness to show that you're pro pipeline and to say it's a good thing to have another one. Like, it really gets that simple. Like, are you pipelines are good, or are you pipelines are bad? And it's such a big defining issue in Alberta. So there's a lot of symbolism. There's a lot of importance around all of this. And, and Danielle Smith has helped to build up those expectations. Like, we need one, and we really hope or expect that this prime minister is going to deliver one. So, yeah, this week we got kind of the list leaked out, and it was obvious that, there's LNG Canada phase 2, but there's no pipeline on this list. And so you started to see kind of this grumbling, like, what's going on here? We've been let down by Carney. We've been screwed again by the Liberals. This is a gift to the separatists, all of that. But my goodness, was Danielle Smith happy and optimistic and bullish and upbeat at her press conference on Thursday morning, because she had a meeting with Carney on Wednesday. And you kind of got the sense, based on what both of them were saying, that there's more to come here. And, it's sort of wink, wink, like we can't really say much at this point, but, we had the news leak out that maybe the emissions cap is toast, like a lot of other Trudeau policies. And yes, the way Carney was talking about this Pathways project and the grand bargain, as Danielle Smith has called it, like the carbon capture plus the pipeline, like it really seems to be setting the stage for that. And so I don't know, Grey Cup is kind of what Carney kept talking about for phase 2. And yeah, it looks like maybe that's where things are going.
I'm not going to change the topic back to the Kirk stuff, but it is interesting, right? Because this week, obviously, we had the Kirk assassination. We had 9/11 anniversary. We had a hell of a scare in Eastern Europe with Russian drones violating NATO airspace, and then major attack on Ukraine. Ukraine hit back with a major attack. We had the major projects office being announced. The reason I bring all this stuff up, and obviously plus all the local news that we all live in, right? Like I get Toronto stories, you get Calgary stories. One of the things that actually broke through all of that, even here in the center of the universe, we're pretty self-absorbed, was Danielle Smith had a very friendly meeting with Mark Carney. And that, Kirk killed, suspect at large, FBI manhunt, Russia invading NATO. Danielle Smith praises Mark Carney. Like, it made the list. And I think you have followed this more. But I'm wondering, I want to ask you a question, just like Berta explained this to me. What happens when Smith says nice things about Carney in Alberta?
Well, it gets noticed, that's for sure. But look, I think there is a strategy here. A lot of it comes down to what's a very old practice in Alberta politics, where a conservative government can use a liberal government in Ottawa as, a political club, right? And so it's easy to dunk on the Liberals in Ottawa, and especially now in Alberta, it's convenient because anything good happening in Alberta, you can sort of take credit for that, and then anything bad, then that's those guys in Ottawa, right? So that's the dynamic. And Smith has been pretty forceful in some of what she said recently about, here's my list of demands, and we expect this, and we're tired of getting pushed around and screwed over, and all of that. But at the same time, I think if Smith can show that approach delivered a big win, then I think to her that's a big win, right? Because she's been, I think, fairly criticized for sort of coddling the separatists, or not really willing to go out of her way to sort of condemn them or take them on. But I think what she's hoping here is that she can show that, look, she can get results. She can get things done. This idea that, if we approach it the right way in Alberta, this can work. So that helps. And I think for Carney, too, the idea that he's someone who gets things done. I think pipelines are popular, not just in Alberta right now. So I think there's potentially a big win for him, too. So that's, I think, the dynamic of what was going on there Wednesday is, how can we both get a political win from this? And the fact that they were both smiling and happy the next day would imply that I think they both see that here.
You wouldn't guess it based on the usual topics we cover here at the Line Podcast, but I like smiles and happiness. Like, I'm all in favor of smiles and happiness.
We'll take it.
One of the things that jumped out at me, it's so interesting, right? Because Jen and I talk about this all the time, and I've talked with you about this on stuff we've done together. Canada is a country that is obsessed with process and obsessed with inputs. But then does that result in outcomes? Well, who gives a shit? Like, the purpose isn't building a pipeline. The purpose is having a press conference where Mark Carney and Danielle Smith announced that, yeah, we're working hard on a pipeline, because then they both get to use that for their own purposes. Like, I've written so many columns about this in recent years, Rob, but the state our politics in, actually, it's not confusing. It actually makes perfect sense when you understand that all the politicians are playing to their incentives, and their incentives are not necessarily, and often are not, actually building a thing. The incentive are all the steps along the way of the process that they get to take credit for. If actually anything gets built, well, great. Everybody shows up. They'll have big scissors. They'll do the symbolic ribbon cutting. There'll be cake and champagne, and that's great. Everybody puts on a hard hat, right? Like, we've all seen about 1 billion of those. But those are hard. Those cost a lot of money. They take a lot of time. So what the politicians have figured out is that they can still derive almost the entire benefit of actually building a thing by having this long, drawn out, interminable process of having a thing that's being built. And they announce milestones, or we broke ground today, or we've approved funding. And I tell me if I have a one track mind, no pun intended. I'm going back to the friggin' trains, the choo-choos, because one of the things that just made me laugh is part of, there was this announcement from the consortium. I don't even know what the hell they call it. I don't know. Is it a crown agency? I don't know what it is. Whoever the human beings are who are building, in theory, the choo-choo. Like they had this statement out kind of saying, hey, like selection by the major project office and what the government is saying is going to allow us to like dramatically accelerate the schedule on this thing. And I'm going, wow, great. That's really cool. And it turns out dramatically accelerating the schedule is going to mean only 4 years of planning. And it's worth mentioning that because it's 4 years of planning outstanding. That still has to happen. And this is a project that nominally was announced by then Prime Minister Trudeau in 2016. So we announced this thing in 2016. And in 2025, we begin our major project effort to cut the planning time, not the construction, but the planning time down to 4 years. And if we stick that landing, that will mean the planning phase for the project announced in 2016 will end in 2029. This isn't great. How do I say this, Rob? I have some concerns about this.
I know. Well, especially given that there's, a crisis that has precipitated all of this. Like, what is actually going to happen now or this calendar year? Even with the projects announced this week, let alone whatever else is coming. Like we are talking years away. So yes, there's so much interest in getting a new pipeline announced in Alberta, which in the long run will be good. But no, let's say at Grey Cup in Winnipeg, there's a big happy announcement of a new pipeline. Well, what's realistic? Best case scenario, you're kind of building the pipeline, 4 or 5 years down the road, a couple of years to complete it. And that seems like best case scenario, even under these shortcuts we've kind of baked in with the major projects office, let alone whatever kinds of opposition or challenges it's going to run into. So who knows, right? It's theoretically 7-8 years down the road. But, the announcement has some value. Danielle Smith is facing an election in 2027, maybe even potentially going early next year, at least if you believe some of the rumors right now. So just having that announcement, having that in her back pocket as the premier who got that done is pretty huge. And especially if it puts a kind of a nail in the coffin of the separatist movement, that probably helps her as well. That's one less thing she's got to worry about here. So there's political value in the idea, the announcement, the photo op of the ribbon cutting and the hard hats and all of that. But when these things actually happen or get people working or get things moving in the economy, that seems really far off.
Rob Breakenridge here, making all of these cognizant, thoughtful, mature points. But here I am barely listening, fighting off tears because I'm just remembering being on that high-speed trail between Porto and Lisbon. And I'm thinking, well, we're never going to get one of those here. It's funny because you're bang on. I agree with everything you just said. And don't worry, I was kidding. I was listening. I got to go to Ottawa next month. Spend a couple of days in Ottawa, just some meetings. My wife asked me last night, you going to drive, fly, or train? And I'm like, I don't know. There's no good option. Right. It's 5 hours. Whatever. I'll bring an audiobook, right? I don't mind driving. Nah. Or it's a plane. All right. I can go to the island airport. I can hop on the little Porter turboprops. I'll be there in an hour and 10 minutes, whatever. But then I got to go to the friggin' island airport. I got to sit there. I don't like flying. Never have. Or I take the train. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I was in Ottawa a couple months ago. I took the train. Complete crapshoot whenever you're riding via. The ride back was okay. We more or less left on time and more or less arrived on time. Getting out of Toronto the night before was a disaster. Hour and a half late. No reason. Just, the trains were busy. It's like it's a traffic jam of trains. It's like, I said to the guy, like, is this unusual? He goes, oh no, it happens every night. Oh, so it's just, so we have nominal arrival and departure times that everybody knows is bullshit. He's like, yeah, yeah, basically. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, good. Like heritage moment, right? Let's all go out and sing Maple Leaf Forever. So yeah, we'll see what they come up with. But in the meantime, Rob, I'm worried that the major projects office is going to be the major announcements office. And even if it works, all it is a shortcut for shit that should just work.
Yeah. And does it fix anything, right? Because we see, the economy's slowing down. We're losing jobs all over the place. Maybe the U.S. courts can kind of save us from some of this, but otherwise, I don't know. It feels like Trump's doubling down, and who the hell knows what's going to happen with Kuzma. Like, there's some very real, urgent challenges we face, and so we need an all hands on deck, take big swings kind of approach. But yeah, announcements don't help the economy. They don't create jobs. Projects do, but some are more easier said than done, I guess.
I'm not making fun of the man. I don't know the man. I'd love to talk to him. I'm sure he'd have interesting things to say. So I'm not making fun of Michael Sabia, but I'm getting to the point where it's almost like an article of like dark humor for me. It's like, well, the Russians just invaded Eastern Europe. Canada, what are you going to do? We have hired Michael Sabia. Oh, okay. Well, like Kuzma is expiring soon, and the Americans are probably, my gut feeling is that we're not going to renegotiate it. I think the White House is going to hand us a protectorate agreement and order us to sign it. And what is our response to be? It's like, well, we've successfully staffed up our offices. Oh, okay. Or there's just been a cyber attack, or drones just took out the port of Vancouver, or there's a new pandemic, or whatever, right? Like any one of 1,000 things that can happen. And our response is going to be, yeah, but we've proposed reforming bail. You're right. Like it's a big, dangerous world, and there's like stuff happening everywhere. And our responses, I was saying to a friend recently, Rob, and we'll drop a pin in it here, but like, a friend of mine asked me recently, what do you think of Carney so far? I'm like, he seems like a nice enough guy, but if this is wartime effort, we're going to lose the war.
Yep.
So, all right. All right. Stick around. We're going to be back. Rob and I are going to do dueling broadcasters in a minute, because he and I have both written columns for The Line this week, and we're going to interview each other about each other's columns. Lots of stuff to talk about when we return. It's Matt Gurney. It's Rob Breakenridge filling in for Jen Gerson. This is The Line Podcast. Go to www.readtheline.ca. Like and subscribe.
All right, this is The Line Podcast. Rob Breakenridge in for Jen Gerson, alongside Matt Gurney here. And Matt, you had an interesting piece this week, and I think this kind of ties to a bigger issue, a big conversation happening in Canada right now, whether it's bail reform, self-defense, just general unease or concern about criminal justice issues. But this is a really unique story, actually right here kind of in my backyard in Edmonton.
Yeah. So let me, I got to say this carefully. I'm working on a story now, and Jen knows about it. And we've been talking with our lawyers about it. And we hope to have something published in a week or two. That is a very upsetting story about a criminal justice matter. And it's the kind of one of the reasons it's going to be slow, Rob, is because we're going to have to put this thing through some legal review, because it involves a minor and there's a publication ban. And we're not going to reveal anything that doesn't want to be revealed. We just have to be really careful in how we present some information. And I read about what was happening in Edmonton this week, and it is not exactly the same as what I've been looking at in the last couple of weeks, but it's not that far off. So, Rob, let me just tell people first what happened here. This is just the facts, and there is a publication ban, so I got to be really careful with this. In 2023, an 8-year-old girl in Edmonton was killed, and her body was then dumped, put into a duffel bag or a hockey bag, and was then dumped. But it was found. A woman was arrested. The woman has not been named. Her identification is also covered by the publication ban. But the facts that have been announced are that this woman had custody of the child. I don't know what their relationship was, but she had the physical custody of the child. She was on drugs, and at some point, the child was injured, apparently by this woman, in a way that was fatal. And that this child, and this is a matter of public record, had suffered what the courts have agreed was, and this is a quote, chronic long-term abuse, and had a long-standing serious injuries. Family members of the deceased victim, the 8-year-old girl, have said that the girl was tortured. I don't know if that's true or not. That's just what they've said. Yeah. The reason this story came to national prominence was because the police in Edmonton put out a statement, a letter that they sent to the government in Alberta, saying that a plea agreement in this case would be inappropriate. Specifically, what they were objecting to was that, according to the police, that the Crown and the defense had agreed to an 8-year plea for manslaughter instead of murder. I want to be very transparent, Rob. I don't know if the police were right, because the plea deal was made this week. The perpetrator, a woman, did accept a plea of manslaughter, but there has been no sentencing yet, and no submission was made. I don't know if the police were wrong, or I don't know if the Crown panicked and backed out of a deal they had been agreeing. I honestly don't know. It's almost immaterial. What jumped out at me, Rob, is that the fucking police never do this. No. This is wildly out of the norm. And you and I, between us, have a depressing number of years in the business, and we've probably covered hundreds of stories like this. The police taking a preemptive public stand against what the prosecutors are about to do is wildly outside the norm. It's shocking. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the police said in their letter, and they sent the letter to a Justice Ministry official. They also released it to the media. So they went out of their way to get attention on this. One of the things they said is that if this plea deal goes ahead, we're going to release information about the crime. And the reason we haven't done that until now, this is what the police said, was because that would taint a jury pool. But if there's never going to be a trial because of a plea deal, that stops being an issue, and we're going to release the facts. Yeah. And you and I, not being born yesterday, we can infer that the facts must be fucking awful about what this little girl went through before she was killed. And this is obviously the police putting the Crown and the government on notice. And I find that really interesting. And I'm going to be honest with you, Rob, and I don't know if I did a good job striking this balance in the column I published on Friday. I am deeply uncomfortable with every part of this. I hate this. Right. I absolutely hate that the police are doing this, but I also think they had to. And I am so aware of the fact that some slopes are slippery. And I don't like being at the top of this greased up slide. I really dislike it, because I know that politicized policing can go to dark places. And I also know that throughout history, a lot of guys like me have only agreed to things that they agreed were bad ideas because it was necessary. Like, that's the classic justification. Well, we didn't want to do it, but we had to. I get all of this. But what I'm worried about, Rob, and you and I were covering this when we were talking a minute ago about the Major Projects Office. This country is dysfunctional in a lot of ways. And the old talk in the election, right? Oh, Canada's broken. Is Canada broken? It feels like a year and a half ago, like everybody in our line of work was debating whether Canada was broken, what broken means. I'm not looking to relitigate all that. But what I am going to say, and I've got a very important data point to back me up here, the public has lost faith in the criminal justice system. There's a Leger poll that came out just a couple of days ago. A majority of Canadians no longer have confidence in the justice system. And Rob, you had decades in daily talk radio. Nothing would light up those call boards like stories like this. Do you have the feeling right now that Canadians are prepared to trust their safety to the police and the courts?
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, and it's the perception. I mean, it was funny. I saw, this week in Vancouver, municipal officials should have bragging about, the crime rate being down 23% or something. Yep. I don't know. I just think right now people just that falls on deaf ears. People aren't interested in that. I think there's just a real fear, a concern about public safety right now, and especially when you hear these stories about like courts almost going out of the way to find a reason to let somebody off with a light sentence, or
Yeah.
it would be bad for this person to go to jail, so let's let them loose and hope for the best. So I think those are the things people are hearing about, and yeah, there are not many other issues that resonate as deeply with people, and I think that's why the whole self-defense thing has become such a huge thing right now, because this is pretty core to a lot of people. The idea that they can go out, take public transit, or just go to sleep in their home and not have to worry about their lives being in danger. So yeah, it matters to people, and it just feels like things are not going in the right direction right now,
and that nothing's being done about it. And
right.
like, I've written 2 columns in the last year or so. And Rob, I don't know if you saw this in the podcast when we did it. I did it with Jen. But a year or 2 ago, I talked with Jen about, I went out with my buddies for a night on the town. And because I was out with my buddies for a night on the town, I wasn't driving that night. I was doing the responsible thing. I took a cab home because we were drinking. And I wasn't so drunk that I failed to notice on my way home that there's a neighborhood quite near to where I live in Toronto, where just because of the geography of the neighborhood, there's only basically one way in and 2 ways in and out. It's like it's like a big crescent with a ravine behind it. So there's like an entrance on either side, and they had private security, and it's a wealthy neighborhood. And I went, holy shit. Like, I remember the next morning kind of waking up going, I don't think I was that drunk. I think that was real. I think that actually happened. So I made a point that the next night, once I was sober as the proverbial judge, I went back and I checked it out. No, there were private security posts at both entrances to this community. And what's fascinating is that in Toronto, you don't have gated communities because the roads are publicly held assets. You cannot prevent anyone from accessing a public road, and you cannot impede emergency vehicles or things like that. So they can't deny you entrance, but the security guards can stop you, take a look, write down your license number. And when I wrote about this, I began hearing from other communities in the Greater Toronto area where neighborhood associations were doing the same thing. I also have strong anecdotal evidence. I don't have solid statistical evidence yet, because in Canada, gathering stats takes fucking forever. I have very good reason to believe that people in Canada have been arming themselves. Couple of the data points of this were, I know a guy who does the safety courses before getting a firearms license. A couple of years ago, 5 years ago, he was doing 2 courses a month, and he'd have 10 people in each. Last year, he was operating classes 5 or 6 days a week. They were full, 20 people each, and he was hiring more staff to meet the demand. Other people I know who are qualified to do this were doing private, almost tutoring sessions for citizens who wanted to get their gun licenses. This is in Toronto. You couldn't keep up with the demand. And I drove up to, there's not a lot of gun stores left in Toronto, but there's a couple. And I spent one day driving around, stopping at a bunch of them. And I was just asking them, look, I told them full up, I'm a journalist, but I'm not anti-gun. I'm not here to cause you guys any trouble. And I'm not going to quote you or name your store. I want to ask you one question. What has business been like in recent years? All of them told me that they can't keep guns and ammunition in stock. It arrives, it's gone. One of the guys at the store in York Region up at the 905. He brought me into his back room. He's like, I got nothing. He goes, look at my inventory. It's bare. He goes, 5 years ago, there would have been boxes of firearms and crates of ammunition. Everything I've got's on the displays right now. I can't keep up with the demand. So there's anecdotal indicators that the public has given up. Politicians don't know what to do about it. The civil society institutions don't know what to do about it. The public is responding, I think, rationally. I don't like that I'm seeing private security and empty gun store shelves, but I think it's a rational response to the circumstances. And what the Edmonton police did was shocking, but we need a shock. We need to be shocked. Yep. Rob, I mean, God, man, how many stories in your career have you done your best to get people to care about, people in positions of authority, and no one did? How often has that happened to you, where you just couldn't get anyone to care?
Yeah, all the time, many times.
Maybe they'll care about this one. Maybe the police putting the Crown and the government on blast and saying, if we don't fix this, we're going to start just releasing the gory details. I hate it, but I have no better ideas. And it's shocking. I think we needed to be shocked.
Yep.
I hate it. Like, every part of me, though, hates this, but boy, like, I'm running out of good ideas. We're talking about the Kirk stuff at the beginning, Rob. When a country loses faith in its institutions and in its basic public safety, that country goes to a dark, dark fucking place. And that is the trajectory we're on right now.
Yeah, and that's the edge I think that police are trying to walk here, because you can argue that this just fuels more distrust and cynicism, and this exacerbates that problem. But if it sort of shocks the system into some action, then potentially some good can come of it. So yeah, it is that proverbial tipping point in terms of what comes of all of this, because ultimately it's not up to police to make those decisions. I understand the pressure Crown prosecutors are under, and just getting something done, getting someone convicted and behind bars, and the uncertainty of a trial and everything else. But yeah, I think this is a unique kind of case. So let's hope something good comes of it.
I want to flip things around here, though, because this is funny. For the listeners and viewers, Rob and I are both trained radio guys. And over the years, I've interviewed him on my radio shows, and he's interviewed me on his radio shows. So we're doing a bit of a reenactment of this. I want to flip the script here. You were just interviewing me. I want to interview you. You were writing a column for The Line this week about Alberta's book ban. I think the story is a bit in the rearview mirror now. It's sort of been we've moved past it a little bit. Mm-hmm. But just remind the listeners here, what happened with the Alberta book ban? What was up with that?
Well, yeah, I think the short version of it is there were some graphic novels, and you can look around. These have been sort of flashpoints in other jurisdictions, primarily in the United States. But these books were flagged. It was brought to the Alberta government's attention, I think, by a couple of sort of socially conservative groups. And I think the Alberta government's thought, this seems like an easy issue for us. I think parents are maybe concerned about, what's going on in schools. And maybe I don't really know what's happening or what kind of things are being talked about or seen by my kids. So they said, look at these graphic novels. There's these illustrations that are probably not appropriate for schools. So something needs to be done about this. And instead of just kind of keeping the focus on graphic images, they ended up drafting this ministerial order that went to school boards that equated words with pictures, basically. So any sort of description of a sexual act is now graphic content and needs to go entirely. So Edmonton Public Schools, so one of the two big ones in Alberta, went through their library and, well, okay, this book matches that definition. So does this and so does that. And it got to a list of 200, including some pretty well-known classics. So it went from, let's keep graphic images out of the classroom to now all of a sudden we've got maybe like the most sweeping book ban we've seen in this country in recent memory. So the Alberta government was stung by it. I think they tried to suggest the school board was reading too much into the ministerial order, but it was pretty clearly written. I mean, this was a government screw up, I think, pretty clearly. So they went back to the drawing board, changed that ministerial order, and we'll see what comes of it. These 4 graphic novels were pulled back in May when they were flagged. So I don't know how much is left, but it became quite a fiasco.
I have an affection for librarians, always have, tough cookies. I was in the spring. I'd forgotten that it was May, but that actually checks out because I remember in the spring a librarian who's a reader of The Line, privately, and I'm not going to say anything about where this person's from or anything to identify them, but a librarian privately sent me some pictures of some of the material that was in these graphic novels. I agree they should not have been in schools. And I'm pretty far out there on the free speech spectrum. But yeah, you know what? That shouldn't have been in schools. I think maybe it could have been in a high school. I think I would have had more of an open mind to that. But these were depictions. Just in one of the ones I looked at, and Rob, I won't use graphic language here, but it was a depiction of a teenage couple engaged in oral sex, right, where one of them, you saw a penis in a mouth. And like this was all like just described drawn in comic book form, right? Mm-hmm. And the characters were explicitly adolescents in the novel. That was it. It was about like it was a coming of age and discovering your sexuality and stuff like that. My immediate question was that, first of all, that could constitute child sex abuse material under Canadian law. Now, there's quibbles around whether or not the depiction is, I think the phrase is for a sexual purpose. So I think there would be some defense there. But at the very least, it was questionable. And I think what was less questionable was the issue of age appropriateness. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing I just find fascinating, Rob, is as far as I can tell, and you're the Alberta guy. I defer to you on Alberta matters. But this strikes me as an issue that if the Conservative government in Alberta had done good government, if they had been good governmenting, they would have had a complete winner here. They would have issued an order that would have gotten prompt results. They would have had the public on their side, and they would have had the facts on their side. They screwed up a winnable issue by bad governmenting. They governmented badly. And people wanted to, like, I know I saw I saw people chirping you and some social media commentary going your way. Nothing new about that. It's part of the game. But people were saying, "Oh, Rob, you lefty." There's nothing lefty about demanding good government. That used to, in fact, be a pretty conservative notion.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the weaknesses for the Alberta government right now. I mean, the Ottawa stuff plays well, but when it comes to meat and potatoes issues, like, I wrote a piece recently for The Line about the mess of the budget is in Alberta. You've got healthcare that's a mess. Auto insurance has turned into a huge mess. And this became a huge mess. So it all sort of adds up to a perception that you're not governing well. You're making a mess of the kinds of issues that you're there to deal with. Like picking fights with Ottawa is easy. Blaming Ottawa is easy. But stuff that you got to deal with, why does everything, turn into a fire that you got to put out? So that's the risk here. Like this could have and should have been simple. And I think, again, there is that perception, and we've seen it with Alberta and some other provinces when it comes to names and pronouns in schools. And there's some unease from parents about, look, I just want to know what's going on in schools. And, there's not stuff going on that I don't want to be going on. So that could have fit neatly into that box. And instead they made a big hash of it. So we'll see what happens now. They've now tried to fix it, and maybe we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, you know what? Always give credit when governments belatedly do the right thing. But my rule is I never hesitate to call them out for failures of process just because they're a government, where I would probably agree with them most of the time. And, I think, almost a meta theme, Rob, that could run through all three of our segments today would be we all need to do a better job keeping our own people in line. If we were as worried about keeping our own house in order as we are keeping other people's houses in order, we probably wouldn't have half the problems we have.
100%.
I don't know. Anything else you want to mention, or do you want to drop a pin on it and wrap it up?
No, I guess probably a good place to leave it. Well, that was fun.
Yeah, well, we recorded this one just so people know. I feel worth mentioning. One of the things Rob and I talked about before we started recording is that we weren't going to get overly deep into the details of the Charlie Kirk stuff. The simple reason being the investigation's moving faster than we can record the friggin' podcast, and there's going to be a delay for editing and then publication. So as we are recording this, Rob, like I mentioned at the beginning, there is a suspect in custody. This is going to stay a story for days, but there's a lot of other stuff happening all over the world. We're going to continue to try and keep an eye on all of it. Rob Breakenridge, thank you. Great to have you here. Rob is the host of the Line Alberta podcast. He's a regular columnist for the Line, filling in for Jen Gerson today, based in Calgary. My thanks to all of you for being part of this, for listening. We'll be back with another episode of On the Line on Tuesday. Rob will have another episode of the Line Alberta podcast out on Wednesday, and there'll be a written dispatch this weekend. So go to readtheline.ca, like and subscribe to us there. Have an amazing weekend, everybody. Take care.